Petrified, vulnerable, nervous, really scared. These are the words that Kyle used to express his feelings about sharing his poem. Feeling that many people would use to describe their experiences of coming out, telling a family member or a friend that they were gay or trans or queer. I'm sure that everyone has experienced these emotions in one way or another. I regularly feel vulnerable while I sit in front of my computer or behind the pulpit, getting ready to speak my truth to a room full of my peers, people who look at me for leadership. I regularly feel petrified when I need to speak in public settings outside of the safety of my sanctuary. Speaking in community settings petrifies me. Even though I have experience and education and practice, I still find it petrifying. Even though this congregation loves me and will witness me with generosity, I am still nervous to speak my truth at times. And yet there is this expectation that I shouldn't be afraid. I do this for a living. I'm supposed to have figured out my anxiety and gotten over it years ago. This is a similar story to that of my coming out. I was 14. I had a boyfriend at the time. Although things were not really working out for us, there was drama amongst our parents and we were not able to keep ourselves away from it. And then I started having feelings for a friend of mine, a girlfriend of mine. This was someone I went to church with, someone that I knew and had sleepovers with, and someone I was close to and shared secrets with. It was much like Kyle described. What is the difference between like and like? Before I had the ability to discover for myself what it meant to have feelings for another girl, I was informed that my friend was going to speak to my parents for me. I felt rushed, embarrassed, petrified. I was 14 years old and I was going to be tattled on. I remember telling my parents that I needed to talk to them. It was late. My parents were getting ready for bed and we were in their bedroom. I wasn't able to tell them. All I could do was tell them I needed to talk. Tears brimming my eyes. I remember sinking to the floor, leaning against the closet door, knees up to my chest, forehead on my knees, arms wrapped protectively around my body. I wasn't prepared to tell my parents. I wasn't even sure I knew what I was going to tell them. But somehow I was able to convey the fact that I thought I was bisexual. Everything else that I remember from that encounter was not pleasant, but also not shaming or dismissive or harmful in any way. Just an unpleasant encounter, much like the way I feel sometimes after speaking publicly. But the thing that one might consider odd is that this story is that I belong to a queer, friendly, LGBTQI affirming family. My mom's brother is gay, a piece of my life that has always been present. My dad grew up Unitarian and took the course About Your Sexuality, the precursor to our current course about sexuality and faith, which is called Our Whole Lives. There were many queer couples at my church, and we even knew a few polyamorous families, and yet I was petrified to come out to my parents. With all of the love and support that I have witnessed in my familial life, there still wasn't support or witness within the larger world. Kyle and I are about the same age. I remember people talking about Ricky Martin being gay when I was in middle school. There is a theory that states that homophobia, or the fear of and negative attitudes towards homosexuals, thrive in an atmosphere of silence and ignorance. Put another way, the reason people are homophobic, transphobic, or oppressive towards people because of their sexual or gender identities exists because they are ignorant and have never witnessed or known somebody who is LGBT or Q. National Coming Out Day is an attempt to combat this atmosphere of ignorance. It is an attempt to lift up to the world that people are queer and present and within our world every day, all over the world. National Coming Out Day originated with the intention that people are far less likely to maintain homophobic ideas or oppressive views if they were just able to witness the life of a queer person. The challenge with this theory is that the first National Coming Out Day was in 1988. At that point in time, coming out was a form of activism, a way to challenge the conventional ideas and fears by showing that gays and lesbians are part of everyday life. Now, 32 years later, things are considerably different. And although being gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, or asexual is still seen as different than the norm, the world is a lot safer and more egalitarian than it was in the 80s. And perhaps in that is the challenge that we still need to overcome. The idea that people who are LGBTQAI are different than the norm. This idea that heterosexuality is normal and expected is problematic. And I believe that this is where the majority of our issues stem from, rather than the ignorance of individuals. National Coming Out Day, while incredibly important in so many ways, only reiterates the idea of heteronormativity because it implicitly and subconsciously states that queer people are deviant and atypical. Much like our story this morning, where it took such a long time for Blue to be seen as he truly was and not just as his rapper describes him, this idea of heteronormativity dictates that we should expect people to behave as their labels express. Except that in our world, our labels are less prevalent than a piece of paper wrapped around your body. The sex that is identified at birth, matching specific gender ideals. Girls are supposed to like boys and boys are supposed to like girls. These are the norms that we have experienced throughout society. And to fall outside of these norms means you are deviant. And this is why coming out for me was so hard. It had absolutely nothing to do with my family and everything to do with society around us. It had to do with the lessons and the expectations that surround the family and household that I grew up in. So we attempted to change that society. National Coming Out Day was one way to move closer to that society where heteronormativity was no longer the forefront of our lives. And now there are other practices. This past January through April, I participated in a training offered by two Unitarian Universalist religious professionals called Transgender Inclusion in Our Congregations. Over these 4 months, we learned about our tendencies to normative expectations, the spirituality and theological pinnings associated with trans people within our faith, and our roles in creating cultural shifts. Our congregation worked through a similar process several years ago called the Welcoming Congregation Program. which is now out of date, unfortunately. But it looks at changing the culture of our faith community, rewriting the normative assumptions and welcoming people from the full spectrum of gender identity and sexual orientation into our community. Creating this system of radical welcome, radical inclusion starts with educating ourselves, having challenging conversations, perhaps in caucuses, which means groups of people with similar identities, so that we can learn from others and express the challenges and the hiccups that we have been culturally expected to believe. Perhaps we should take a next step in rewriting our understanding of Colony Unitarians' culture. One way of doing this is working through the renewal process of the Welcoming Congregations program. Another way would be to have a group of people work through the transgender inclusion in our congregations program. Being more explicit in our welcome and more representative in our cultures, and more representative of the culture that we want to shift to are ways in which we can better create cultural shift. I encourage people to continue having conversations about the things that our culture has argued as normal. I encourage people to join in conversations that are challenging and be pushed outside of your comfort zone. And I invite people to join me next Sunday at 1 p.m. on our Zoom link to have a continued conversation about what social justice could look like for our congregation. LGBTQAI rights and equality is only one avenue that we might travel down, but we need to have a conversation about where people want to go. I want to finish this morning by saying that deep listening is a practice that will allow us to move closer to hearing the stories and the changing the narrative of our society. But deep listening is not the only thing that we need. Society has spent more than 30 years visibly witnessing people coming out of the closet. It is time that we shift into changing our understanding and changing our culture in more meaningful ways than just listening. Thank you.